Jake Morrison had always loved the quiet of the forest at night. Working as a park ranger in the mountains of Montana meant lots of alone time, which suited him just fine these days. After losing his wife 3 years ago, he found peace in the stillness of the woods where nobody asked him how he was doing or when he might start dating again. It was almost midnight when he saw the strange lights through the trees. At first, he thought maybe some teenagers had snuck into the park for a bonfire. Wouldn't be the first time. But as he drove his Ranger truck down the winding forest road, something felt different. The lights weren't flickering like a campfire. They were steady, almost like car headlights, but pointing up at the sky instead of ahead. Jake slowed his truck and grabbed his flashlight. The woods were dead quiet except for the usual cricket sounds and wind through the pine trees. He'd been doing this job for 12 years and knew these mountains like the back of his hand. Whatever was out there didn't belong. He parked and started, walking toward the light, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. The closer he got, the stranger everything seemed. There was a weird humming sound, almost like electricity, but softer, and the air felt different somehow, like right before a thunderstorm, but without any clouds in the sky. When Jake pushed through a thick cluster of bushes, he stopped dead in his tracks. What he saw didn't make any sense at all. There was definitely some kind of vehicle, but it wasn't like any car or truck he'd ever seen. It was sleek and silver, maybe the size of a small RV, but shaped all wrong. Parts of it were definitely broken, with pieces scattered around the small clearing like metal confetti. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the woman sitting on a fallen log about 20 feet away, holding a small child. In her arms, Jake's first thought was that they'd been in some kind of accident. Maybe the thing was some sort of experimental aircraft that had crashed. He'd heard stories about the military testing weird stuff in remote areas. His second thought was that the woman and kid might be hurt and need help. "Hey there," he called out, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly. "Are you folks okay? I'm Jake. I work for the Park Service." The woman looked up at him, and that's when Jake noticed something was off about her eyes. They were blue, but not quite the right shade of blue. Too bright, almost like they had tiny lights behind them. And when she looked at him, he felt a weird tingling in his head, like someone was gently touching his thoughts. "Please," she said, and her voice had a musical quality to it that he'd never heard before. "We need help. We are not dangerous." The child in her arms couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. A boy with dark hair and the same unusual bright eyes as the woman. He was awake but quiet, looking at Jake with an intelligence that seemed too old for such a young face. Jake took a step closer, his ranger training kicking in. "Check for injuries first. Ask questions later. Are either of you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" The woman shook her head. "We are not injured in the way you mean, but we are in great danger. Others are coming who wish to take my child. I know this sounds impossible to believe, but we are not from your world." Jake felt his brain trying to process what she'd just said. Not from his world. Like, not from America. Not from Earth. The rational part of his mind said she was probably in shock from whatever accident had happened. People said crazy things after trauma, but looking at her, at the child, at the impossible vehicle behind them, rational explanations were getting harder to hold onto. "Look," he said, settling down on one knee so he wasn't looming over them. "I don't know what happened here tonight, but you're safe now. My name's Jake Morrison, and I promise I'm not going to hurt you. Can you tell me your names?" "I'm called Zara." The woman said, "This is Kale. We have traveled very far to escape those who would harm him. Our transport was damaged during our flight." Jake looked back at the strange silver vehicle. Up close, he could see that it definitely wasn't made by any human technology he knew about. The metal seemed to shift and shimmer in the light from his flashlight, and there were no visible seams or welds anywhere. It was like the whole thing had been grown rather than built. "Zara," he repeated, testing the name. It suited her somehow. "Okay, Zara, I believe something bad happened to you tonight, but I need you to help me understand what we're dealing with here." The child, Kale, spoke for the first time. His voice was soft but clear. You have a kind heart. I can feel it. We are not here to cause trouble for your people. Jake felt that strange tingling in his head again, stronger this time. For just a moment, he could swear he saw flashes of images that weren't his own memories. A beautiful city with tall spires reaching toward a purple sky. Ships flying through space between distant stars. And something darker, scarier, other. Beings with weapons, chasing Zara and Kale through corridors of light. He blinked hard and the images faded, leaving him feeling slightly dizzy. What just happened? He asked. Zara looked apologetic. Kale is young and his abilities are not yet controlled. He means no harm. Sometimes our emotions reach out to others, especially when we are afraid. Jake sat back on his heels, trying to make sense of everything. Part of him wanted to call this into his supervisor. Maybe get some federal agents involved. But a bigger part of him looked at this woman and child, clearly terrified and asking for help, and knew he couldn't just hand them over to people who might not understand. His wife had always said he had to soften the heart for his own good. She'd been right about a lot of things. These others you mentioned, Jake said slowly. The ones who are chasing you. How much time do we have? I do not know, Zara admitted. Our trail was hidden by the crash, but they will find us eventually. They always do. Jake made a decision that would change his life forever, though he didn't know it yet. Okay, here's what we're going to do. My cabin isn't far from here, and it's pretty isolated. You and Kale can stay there tonight while we figure out next steps. But first, we need to deal with this. He gestured at the damaged craft and scattered debris. If people find this, there are going to be questions I can't answer. Can this thing be moved? Zara shook her head sadly. The drive core is damaged beyond my ability to repair. It will not fly again. Then we hide it, Jake said, his mind already working on the problem. I know these woods better than anyone. There are places we can drag the pieces where they'll never be found. For the first time since he found them, Zara smiled. It was like watching the sun come up. You would truly help us, even though you do not fully understand what we are. Jake looked at her, at the frightened but brave child in her arms, and felt something stir in his chest that had been quiet for 3 long years. Maybe it was just his old instinct to protect people who needed protecting. Maybe it was something more. Yeah, he said simply, I'd help you. As they worked together through the night to hide the evidence of Zara and Kel's arrival on Earth, Jake found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. But every time he looked at them, every time he caught Kale watching him with those 2 wise eyes or saw Zara's grateful smile, he knew he'd made the right choice. By dawn, it was like nothing had ever happened in that forest clearing, and Jake Morrison, who thought his life had been pretty much figured out, was about to discover that some of the best adventures begin when you choose to help a stranger in need. 3 weeks had passed since Jake brought Zara and Kale to his cabin, and his life had turned completely upside down in the best possible way. What started as a simple act of helping strangers had become something he never expected. For the first time in years, his home felt alive again. The cabin had been too quiet since his wife passed away. Now it was filled with Kel's curious questions and Zara's gentle laughter. The boy was fascinated by everything about Earth, from the way Jake's old coffee maker gurgled in the morning to how squirrels stored nuts for winter. Watching the world through Kel's eyes reminded Jake of all the small wonders he'd forgotten. To notice Zara was different from anyone Jake had ever met. She moved with a grace that seemed almost like dancing, and when she smiled, it was like she was sharing some beautiful secret. But it was more than that. She listened when he talked, really listened, in a way that made him feel understood for. The first time in years, teaching them about human life became Jake's favorite part of each day. He showed Zara how to use the washing machine, laughing when she jumped back the first time it started spinning. He taught Kale to play checkers, though the boy picked up the rules so fast that Jake suspected he was holding back. To make the games more fair, in return, they shared stories about their world. Zara described cities that floated among the clouds, and gardens where plants sang with the wind. Kale showed Jake pictures in his mind of creatures that looked like dolphins, but flew through the air instead of swimming through water. Their world sounded like paradise, which made it even sadder. That they couldn't go home. My people are healers and explorers. Zara explained one evening as they sat by the fireplace. We have always believed that knowledge should be shared, that different worlds could learn from each other. But some of our leaders changed. They decided that our abilities made us superior, that other species should serve us rather than work with us. Jake could hear the pain in her voice. Is that why you left? I was part of a group trying to save children from the new programs, she said quietly. They wanted to train young ones like Kale to be weapons instead of healers. When we tried to evacuate the children to safety, we were branded as traitors. Kale, who had been quietly reading one of Jake's old adventure books, looked up. Zara saved me when the bad people came to take me away. She's the bravest person I know. Jake felt his heart squeezed tight, looking at this woman who had risked everything to save a child who wasn't even her own. He understood why his instinct had been to trust her from that first night in the forest. As the days passed, Jake found himself looking forward to coming home from work in a way he hadn't since before his wife got sick. Zara would have dinner waiting, usually something that combined human ingredients with techniques from her world. That made everything taste somehow brighter. Kale would excitedly tell him about whatever new thing he'd learned that day, from how television worked to why leaves change colors in the fall. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Evenings when Kale would fall asleep on the couch between them while they watched old movies. Mornings when Zara would sit with Jake on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise over the mountains. Times when their hands would accidentally touch while passing dishes at dinner, and neither of them would pull away. Jake tried not to think too hard about what was happening to his heart. It felt like betraying his wife's memory to care about someone new. But Zara seemed to understand his struggle without him having to explain it. Love is not a limited resource, she told him one night when he'd been particularly quiet. Your wife would want you to be happy. The love you had for her doesn't become less because you open your heart to new people. How do you know what she would have wanted? Jake asked, not unkindly. Zara smiled that mysterious smile of hers. Because I can feel the kind of man she chose to love. She picked someone with a generous heart, someone who would help strangers in a forest and open his home to people who needed safety. That was the night Jake realized he was falling in love with her, not just attracted to her otherworldly beauty or fascinated by her abilities, but genuinely, deeply in love with who she was as a person. The crisis that brought them even closer happened on a Tuesday morning. Jake had gone to work as usual, but something felt wrong all day. He couldn't concentrate on his ranger duties, kept checking his phone even though Zara and Kale didn't have a way to call him. Around noon, he gave up pretending to work and headed home. He found Kale collapsed on the kitchen floor, burning with fever, while Zara knelt beside him looking more frightened than Jake had ever seen her. I don't understand what's wrong, she said, her voice shaking. His body is rejecting something in your atmosphere. On our world, I could heal him easily. But here my abilities are weaker. Jake didn't hesitate. He scooped Kale up and carried him to the truck. We'll figure it out. What do you need? For the next 6 hours, Jake drove Zara all over the mountains, searching for specific plants she said might help. She knew their scientific names but had to touch each one to see if it contained the right energy. Some grew in meadows they had to hike miles to reach. Others clung to rocky cliff faces that Jake had to rappel down to collect. By evening, they had everything Zara needed. Back at the cabin, Jake held Kale while Zara prepared a medicine unlike anything he'd ever seen. She ground the plants with her hands, and they began to glow with a soft green light. When she placed the mixture on Kale's forehead, the boy's fever broke immediately. Thank you, Zara whispered as Kale's eyes fluttered open. I could not have saved him alone. We're a team, Jake said, and realized he meant it completely. Later that night, after Kale was sleeping peacefully in his bed, Jake and Zara sat together on the porch under a sky full of stars. I was so scared today, Zara admitted, not just of losing Kale, but of losing this life we've built here with you. Jake took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. You're not going to lose it, whatever comes. We'll face it together. For the first time in 3 years, Jake Morrison felt like he was exactly where he belonged. He had a family again, even if it was the most unusual family anyone could imagine. And looking at the woman beside him, seeing the way she looked back at him, he knew she felt the same way. Neither of them knew that their peaceful time was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. The first sign of trouble came from Jake's boss, Chief Ranger Tom Bradley. Tom had known Jake for 8 years and prided himself on reading people well. So when Jake started acting different, Tom noticed right away. "You seem happier lately," Tom said one morning as they reviewed patrol schedules. "More energetic." "That's good to see. But you've also been taking a lot of personal time." "Everything okay at home?" Jake felt his stomach tighten. He'd been careful, but apparently not careful enough, just working on some projects around the cabin. "You know how it is," Tom nodded, but Jake could tell he wasn't completely convinced. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. You're like a different person these days." That afternoon, Jake drove home faster than usual, his mind racing. He'd been so focused on helping Zara and Kale adjust to life on Earth that he hadn't thought about how his own behavior might seem suspicious to people who knew him well. When he got to the cabin, he found Zara teaching Kale to tend the small vegetable garden behind the house. The sight of them working together, Zara's hands gently guiding Kale's as he planted seeds, made Jake's heart skip a beat. But it also reminded him how much they all had to lose if their secret came out. "We need to talk," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm Kale. That evening, after Kale had gone to bed, Jake and Zara sat at the kitchen table discussing their situation. Jake explained about his conversation with Tom, and Zara's face grew serious. "I have been sensing something as well," she said. "There are disturbances in the energy patterns around this area. I believe my people may be getting closer." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "How close?" "Close enough that I have been having dreams of them searching. They have not found us yet, but they are scanning this region." Zara's eyes met his. "Jake, if they find us here, you will be in danger too. Perhaps you should consider asking us to leave." "Absolutely not," Jake said without hesitation. "We're in this together, remember." Over the next few days, things got more complicated. Jake noticed a black SUV parked at the main ranger station that hadn't been there before. When he asked Tom about it, his boss seemed nervous. "Some federal agents asking questions about unusual activity in the forest," Tom said. "Not quite meeting." Jake's eyes, "Probably nothing. But they want to interview all the rangers about anything strange we might have seen in the past month." Jake's blood ran cold. He managed to keep his expression neutral, but inside he was panicking. What kind of strange activity, energy readings, unusual lights, that sort of thing? You know how the government gets about anything they can't explain. Tom shrugged. "I told them our boys know these woods better than anyone. If something weird was going on, we'd have noticed." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, watching the tree line and thinking about what would happen if the agents came to interview him. He was a terrible liar under the best circumstances, and these weren't the best circumstances. "You are worried," Zara said softly. Joining him on the porch, she moved so quietly he hadn't heard her approach. "Federal agents are asking questions. They might want to talk to me." Jake looked at her, memorizing her face in the moonlight. "If they do, I don't know if I can protect you." Zara sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. "You have already done more for us than we had any right to ask. If we must run again, we will. But where would you go? You don't know anyone else, and Kale is just starting to feel safe here." "Kale is stronger than you think," Zara said gently. "And so am I. We survived before we met you." Jake turned to face her fully. "But you shouldn't have to just survive. You should get to live, to be happy, to have a real home." Something shifted in Zara's expression. "Is that what this is to you? A real home?" Jake's heart started beating faster. They'd been dancing around their feelings for weeks, but neither had said anything directly. "It's the most real home I've had since my wife died. You and Kale, you brought life back into this place, into me." Zara reached out and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "For my people. There is something called a soul bond. It happens rarely, but when it does, Two beings become connected in ways that go beyond the physical world. What does that mean? Jake asked, though part of him already knew. It means that what I feel for you is not just attraction or gratitude. It is recognition. My soul recognizes yours. Her eyes seem to glow in the moonlight. I believe you feel it too. Jake couldn't deny it anymore. The pull he felt toward her, the way she seemed to understand his thoughts before he spoke them, the way his heart raced whenever she was near. I do feel it, but I don't understand how it's possible. Love rarely makes logical sense, Sarah said with a small smile. But it is still real. Before Jake could overthink it, he leaned forward and kissed her. The moment their lips touched, he felt that familiar tingling in his head, but stronger this time. Images flashed through his mind, but these weren't memories of her world. They were visions of a possible future. Him and Zara and Kale living peacefully. Other families like theirs, building something new together. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Was that the bond forming? Jake asked. Zara nodded. Partly. It will grow stronger over time, if we let it. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching on the forest road. Jake jumped up, his Ranger instincts kicking in. No one should be driving out here this late at night, inside. Now, he whispered urgently, turn off all the lights. They crept through the dark cabin to the window that faced the road. The black SUVs were moving slowly up the mountain, their headlights sweeping back and forth like they were searching for something. Kale appeared. Beside them, his face pale but calm. They are not my people, he said quietly. These are your government agents. Jake's mind raced. The vehicles were still a mile away, but they were definitely heading toward his cabin. We need to get you two out of here. There's an old hunting shelter about 3 miles up the ridge. It's hidden and stocked with supplies. What about you? Zara asked. I'll stay here and act normal. If they're coming to question me, running will only make them more suspicious. Jake grabbed his emergency pack from the closet. Take this. There's food, water, and camping gear. Follow the trail behind the garden until you reach the big boulder. That looks like a bear. Turn left and keep climbing. Zara gripped his hand tightly. How will we know when it's safe to return? Jake thought quickly. I'll leave a red bandana tied to the mailbox when the coast is clear. No bandana means stay hidden. As Zara and Kale slipped out the back door and into the forest, Jake forced himself to calm down. He turned on a few lights, made some coffee, and settled in to wait. If the agents were coming to question him, he needed to look like a man who'd been peacefully relaxing at home. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across his front windows. Jake took a deep breath and opened the door before they could knock, trying to look curious rather than nervous. Evening, officers. Kind of late for a house call, isn't it? The rest of that night would test everything Jake had learned about protecting the people he loved. The federal agents stayed for 2 hours, asking Jake detailed questions about anything unusual he might have seen in the forest. Agent Collins, a serious woman with sharp eyes, seemed particularly interested in the area where Jake had first found Zara and Kale, but Jake stuck to the story about routine patrols and seeing nothing out of the ordinary. Finally, they left with a warning to call immediately if he noticed anything strange. Jake waited until their taillights disappeared completely before tying the red bandana to his mailbox. Within an hour, Zara and Kale emerged from the forest, like shadows, both looking tired but unharmed. How did it go? Zara asked as they settled back into the cabin. They're definitely looking for something, but they don't know what yet. We bought some time, but we need to be more careful. Jake pulled the curtains closed and double-checked the door locks. Maybe it's time to think about moving you somewhere safer. For the next 3 days, they lived in a strange kind of limbo. Jake went to work and acted normal while keeping his ears open for any news about the investigation. At home, they spoke in whispers and kept the lights low after dark. The carefree happiness of the past weeks felt like a distant memory. It was on the 4th night that Zara asked to speak with Jake privately. Kale had gone to bed early, exhausted from the stress of staying hidden, and the house felt unusually quiet. There is something I must tell you, Zara said as they sat together on the couch. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she wouldn't. Meet his eyes. Something I should have explained before our bond formed. Jake felt his stomach clench. What is it? Zara took a deep breath. Kale is not my biological child. Jake blinked in surprise. Of all the things she might have said, he hadn't expected that. What do you mean? I was assigned as his guardian during the evacuation, but his real parents died in the first attack. On our settlement, I have raised him as my own, and I love him as my own. But he is not born of my body. Zara's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the emotion underneath. There were 12 children in our group when we escaped. The others were captured or lost along the way. Kale is the only one who survived. Jake reached for her hand. That doesn't change anything for me. You're still his mother in every way that matters. That is not the difficult part. Zara said quietly. The difficult part is why I was really sent to Earth. Something cold settled in Jake's chest. I thought you came here to escape. That is true, but it is not the whole truth. Zara finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with sadness. My people are dying, Jake. The new government has started wars with other species, and many of our young people have been lost. In battles, our population is falling rapidly. Jake waited, sensing there was more. Before I left, the resistance leaders gave me a mission. They believe that if some of our people could adapt to live on other worlds, our species might survive even if our home planet falls. Zara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They sent me here to find suitable partners and begin a new branch of our family tree. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Partners? You mean like breeding partners? Not like animals, Zara said quickly. My people form deep bonds with their mates. What we have between us is real, Jake. The mission was to find someone compatible. But I never expected to find love. Jake stood up and walked to the window, his mind spinning. So this whole time, you've been evaluating me, seeing if I'd be good enough to father your children? No, that is not how it happened at all. Zara stood too, her voice urgent. The bond between us formed naturally. When I realized what was happening, I tried to fight it because I did not want you to think I was manipulating you. But you were sent here specifically to have children with humans. Yes, Zara admitted, but not with any human, only with one. Who could be a true partner? Someone who could love and protect our children and help them understand both worlds. They would belong to. Jake turned back to face her. Children who would be half human, half alien. Children who could survive on Earth if our world falls. Children who might one day help bring peace between our species. Zara stepped closer to him. I know how this sounds, but you must believe me when I say that my feelings for you are genuine. Jake sank back onto the couch, overwhelmed. How many children are we talking about? The resistance hoped for several families, spread across different areas of your planet. Each family might have 2 or 3 children over time. Zara sat beside him, careful not to touch him. But Jake, I need you to understand something important. Even if you said no to this mission, I would still want to stay with you and Kale. What we have built here matters more to me than any assignment. Jake stared at the floor, trying to process everything. The woman he'd fallen in love with had been sent to Earth specifically to start a new generation of human alien children. It should have felt like betrayal, but somehow it didn't. Maybe because he could see the pain in her eyes, or because he knew in his heart that what they felt for each other was real. What would these children be like? He asked finally. Stronger and healthier than most humans, with longer lifespans. They would have some of our mental abilities, but be adapted to Earth's environment. They would look human enough to fit in, but special enough to bridge the gap between our peoples. Before Jake could respond, Kale appeared in the doorway. The boy looked fully awake despite the late hour, and his expression was unusually serious for a child. I have been listening, he said simply. I know it is not polite, but this affects my future too. Jake felt a mix of surprise and respect for the boy's honesty. What do you think about all this, Kale? Kale walked over and sat cross-legged on the floor in front of them. I have dreams sometimes about the children you and Zara might have. They are beautiful dreams. The children are happy and loved, and they help make both worlds better. You've seen this? Jake asked. Kale nodded. Some of my people can see possible futures. The children I see in my dreams are not weapons or tools. They are just children, who happen to be very special. Jake looked between Zara and Kale. These two beings who had completely changed his life. A month ago, he'd been a lonely widower with nothing to look forward to except quiet years of solitude. Now he was being asked to help save an entire species and father a new kind of human. I need time to think about this, he said finally. Zara nodded. Of course, this is not a decision to make quickly. But even as Jake said the words, part of him already knew what his answer would be. He'd already given his heart to Zara and accepted Kale as family. The idea of children who combine the best of both worlds didn't scare him as much as he thought it should. What scared him was the enormous responsibility of raising children, who might help determine the future of two entire species. That night, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling, knowing that whatever he decided would change not just his life, but potentially the course of history itself. Jake spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about Zara's revelation. He walked the forest trails for hours, trying to imagine what life would be like if he said yes to her mission. Children who were part human, part something incredible, a chance to help save an entire species, but also a responsibility bigger than anything he'd ever faced. On the 4th morning, he found his answer in the most unexpected place. He was sitting on his porch with his morning coffee when Kale came outside and sat beside him. The boy had been quieter than usual since their conversation, and Jake could tell something was weighing on his mind. Are you afraid of having children? With Zara, Kale asked with directness that only children possess. Jake considered the question carefully. I'm not afraid of the children themselves. I think they would be amazing. I'm afraid of letting them down. My real father used to say something, Kale said, looking out at the mountains. He said that the best parents are not the ones who never feel scared. They are the ones who feel scared but love their children more than they fear making mistakes. Jake felt something click into place in his chest. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, and he would have liked you very much. Kale turned to look at Jake with those 2 old eyes. You saved me when you did not have to. You gave me a home when you could have turned us away. That is what good fathers do. Before Jake could respond, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the road. Jake grabbed his binoculars and spotted 2 black helicopters moving low over the forest, heading straight for their area. Get Zara, Jake said urgently. We need to move now. Within minutes, they were running through the forest with hastily packed bags. Jake led them along old hunting trails he'd known since childhood, paths that wouldn't show up on any government map. Behind them, he could hear the helicopters landing near his cabin and the distant shouts of search teams. They hiked for 6 hours before reaching an abandoned fire lookout tower deep in the wilderness. Jake had discovered it years ago and sometimes used it for overnight camping trips. It was perfect for hiding, with a clear view of the surrounding area and only one narrow path leading up to it. As they caught their breath in the small cabin at the top of the tower, Zara looked out at the forest stretching endlessly in all directions. They will not give up, she said quietly. My people or yours, eventually, we will be found. Jake watched her profile against the window. This incredible woman who had turned his quiet life into an adventure he never could have imagined. In that moment, he realized he'd been asking himself the wrong question. It wasn't whether he was brave enough to help save her species. It was whether he was brave enough to build a life with the woman he loved, no matter what challenges that might bring. Then we don't hide, he said. We find others like us and build something new. Zara turned to him in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, I've made my decision. Jake took her hands in his. I want to have children with you, not because some resistance leaders sent you on a mission, but because I love you and I want to build a family together. If those children happen to help save 2 worlds in the process, then that's just a bonus. Zara's eyes filled with tears. Are you certain? Once we start down this path, there's no going back to your old life. Jake laughed, feeling lighter than he had in days. What old life? You and Kale are my life now. Everything else is just details we'll figure out as we go. Kale, who had been quietly watching the search helicopters through binoculars, suddenly spoke up. "There are others, other search teams," Jake asked. "No, other families like us." Cale's voice carried that distant quality it got when he was seeing things beyond the present moment. "I can sense them. Some are far away, but some are closer than we think. Humans who have helped my people, and my people who have chosen to stay on Earth." Zara moved to stand beside Cale, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Can you see where they are?" Cale closed his eyes and was quiet for a long moment. "There is a woman named Dr. Chen in California who has been treating my people in secret, and a family in Canada where a human man married one of our healers 3 years ago. They have a little girl now." Jake felt his heart race with excitement. "You mean we're not alone in this?" "We were never alone," Zara said softly. "The Resistance has been working with humans on Earth for longer than I told you. They just never told us about each other for safety reasons." Over the next several hours, as they waited for the search teams to move on, they made plans. They would reach out to the other families Cale had sensed and begin building a network, not just for protection, but for community. Their children would need to know others like themselves, would need to understand that they weren't strange or alone, but part of something bigger and more beautiful than either species could create separately. As the sun set over the mountains, Jake watched Zara and Cale working together to prepare their simple dinner. For the first time since this all began, he felt completely at peace with his choices. 6 months later, Jake stood in the garden behind their new home in a remote valley in Oregon. It was one of several properties the growing network had established, hidden communities where human alien families could live openly and safely. Zara was 4 months pregnant with their first child, glowing with health and happiness. Cale had started a small school with other hybrid children, teaching them about both their heritages while helping them control their developing abilities. Jake's old life as a park ranger felt like it had belonged to someone else. He was now a coordinator for the network, helping newly formed families find safe places to build their lives. It was challenging work, but more fulfilling than anything he'd ever done. "Any regrets?" Zara asked, joining him in the garden where she was teaching him to grow plants from her world alongside Earth vegetables. Jake looked at their thriving community, at the children playing in the meadow beyond their home, at the woman carrying his child. He thought about his wife and knew she would have approved of the love he'd found in the family he was building. "Not a single one," he said, pulling Zara close. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Above them, the first stars were appearing in the clear mountain sky. Some of those stars shone down on Zara's homeworld, where the Resistance was still fighting for freedom. Others lit the way for ships carrying more refugees to Earth, seeking the same chance at happiness that Jake and Zara had found together. Their story was just beginning, but Jake already knew it would be an adventure worth every moment of uncertainty and every leap of faith it had taken to get here. Love, he had learned, was the most powerful force in any universe.